Welcome to my webinar on freedom, social responsibility, and liberation. The title sounds rather philosophical, and I guess I got there from philosophical considerations, but this will become very practical and very much looking into the energies and the memes, which are the ideas that we hold about these issues that may be interfering with our comfort in this time. I became interested in the issue of freedom, particularly freedom of speech. Even as a youngster, I think I was in high school, when the ACLU defended the right of some neo-Nazis to hold a march in Cicero, Illinois, which was a suburb of Chicago that had a very large Jewish population, and particularly a population of people who had survived the Holocaust. And the ACLU defended the right of the neo-Nazis to hold their march and basically to express their hatred for people of Jewish religion. In the face of enormous opposition to the march. And the march was held. It wasn't very well attended, if I remember correctly, but it's regarded as a very landmark experience, choice, for those who treasured free speech. And the question was whether free speech included hate speech and what sort of hate speech. And over the years, I found myself very much involved and engaged in issues, social issues, political issues, and became aware of how powers that be often limited speech and how the right to speech was so very central to living in a democracy. That level of freedom is essentially an absolute requirement. And so I've always been a defender of free speech. I did write on Facebook, I think. I'm trying to think if it was anything else, but I wrote on Facebook about hate speech and how just saying nasty things about other people was not really a right under the idea of free speech, freedom of speech. And that particularly on college campuses, bringing in speakers whose job it was to be divisive, hateful, very negative about certain people was something that fell under the guise of freedom of speech. And my point was at that time that the universities could allow it, but allow such speakers to come, but that it should be in the context of a forum where opposing ideas would also be presented, because that really was in the notion of an academic environment. An academic environment was a place where various ideas were discussed, not just presented, because when they're presented, particularly in the way they were being presented, those presentations were meant to sway people in their social and political views, as I suppose all speech is, but without a countervening presentation of ideas. It wasn't an academic discussion. It was strictly a political discussion, and the university, I felt, had a right to exclude that from the campus. So that's kind of my political background on this. Now, when one thinks about freedom of speech, you can ask a lot of questions about, well, not just freedom of speech, but freedom to practice your religion, freedom to express your opinions on controversial issues around race, gender, education, government, security, etc. And so the question then gets down to, are we avoiding social dialogue even because we fear that someone will call us out for whatever we say? That's a very real consideration. Now, I originally thought I might go through this discussion in a kind of analytic way and come to a logical conclusion, which is my usual modus operandi. But I actually thought tonight I should start with the idea of liberation, bondage and liberation. But we're going to emphasize liberation, of course, which is like presenting the solution and then going to talk about the problem. But the reason I want to do that is that society has gotten to be so divided. There's so much division, and no middle ground seems left on practically any issue. People are very, very absolute about their opinions on many, many things. And so getting into that is very uncomfortable and very disquieting. And so I wanted to talk about liberation, because liberation obviously is the ultimate state of freedom, the freedom to be who you are and do what you are supposed to do in this lifetime and at each and every moment. And that state of liberation is the state of non-attachment to specific outcomes and specific ideas. It's not that we don't have values and have ideas and have opinions, but that the energy that gets bound up in that is so prevalent today isn't there. That energy is dissipated, and we're able to function and flow with whatever comes up. And so we can see someone presenting an idea, particularly an idea that we really don't like. Perhaps he's something very racist, xenophobic, homophobic, or whatever. Or just an idea that maybe represents a positive conservative value, like limiting the national debt and not spending more than you have, which is a traditional conservative value. We may not agree with that, but how we react to it when somebody says something like that gives us the freedom to remain in contact with the person, remain in connection with the person, remain in rapport with the person, and to explore with the person perhaps what they really mean about that and why it's important to them. Ask yourself, when was the last time you asked somebody who really held a political or social position that was diametrically opposed to what you believe, and that you felt there was no room for discussion, and ask them, why do you think that? Why do you believe that? And it can be gratifying, it can be disappointing. Many times when I've asked people, what I get back is more rhetoric, and oftentimes discovered that they hold information that isn't true. It simply isn't true. And I run into it frequently, even with people who are very close to me, particularly around the COVID pandemic, and how we deal with it and how we relate to it. And I don't mind people having strong ideas, but I find it very difficult when we don't agree on the facts. And, as a physician, I have some fairly strong ideas about what the facts are, based on some fairly extensive reading and contact with professionals. So this whole approach to our freedom is very vexing. It can be very challenging. So I'm going to suggest that one of the things we might do when we're in that context is come to it from that sense of observation, that sense of liberation of attachment, liberation from attachment to specific ideas, specific facts, as it were. And also just to accept that some people are very locked into what they think and what they believe and what they want. And they may not respond even to our kindest and most curious approach. Now, there's another sense of freedom, another argument that's going on today about freedom. And it's called cancel culture. And it's the notion that when you disagree with somebody, you say they should not express that opinion. They should not hold that opinion. They should not be able to influence others or control others from the basis of that opinion, which you feel is nothing but opinion and is not based on facts and substantive information. And that's a very difficult thing. If you think about it, both sides of the political spectrum are accusing the other of canceling them out. And that's just, again, a reflection of that great deal of polarization that exists, that people do not feel like they trust other people unless they really agree with them, right? So you trust the people that agree with you, and you unfriend in the capital F kind of friend way that relates to social media. You unfriend, people that, just adamantly disagree with you. I've had quite a number of disagreements in recent months. Most of them I try to keep private. A couple of them have been in a public forum, but I don't find that the discussions on social media are very effective, because most of the people that chirping is a good word, chirp, chirp, like little birds, they chirp in. They're just expressing an emotion. It's not really that they're contributing to a discussion with ideas that have merit and should be deeply considered. So I don't usually engage on social media. So that's another little piece of something that I could toss out tonight about dealing with social issues that come up. A lot of people today feel that their freedoms are restricted by governments. And that's on the right and the left, by the way, politically. It's definitely not reserved from one to the other. I read something from one of my senators, Ernst. It was Joni Ernst. And no, I'm sorry, that's not who it was. I think it was Marionette Miller Meeks. And if you read it carefully, it sounded like it was written by somebody on the political left. They were using words that people on the political left use a lot, but the position was entirely right wing. And this kind of obfuscation, this kind of distortion of the positions and viewpoints of the different sides is something that makes the conversation uncomfortable and persists in keeping us divided rather than bringing us together. The irony of that is it sounds like it's trying to bring us together. It sounds like the person is bridging the aisle between one side and the other, but they're not really, if you actually read the thing carefully. And so, it makes it very difficult. So we often find that, or maybe we find people, or maybe ourselves, believe that our freedoms are restricted by our governments. They have all kinds of rules and regulations. You have to have permits for this and licenses for that. And, can raise the question of, is that legitimate? We talked about cancel culture briefly, the idea that we exclude or dismiss any group or any idea that is contrary to what we believe. Such things should not exist. We feel that our freedoms are restricted by the policies of institutions or by political figures or political parties. And if you're feeling those things, then we have to ask, are they really diminishing us? Are they really restricting us? And do I have to go along with that? Do I have to acquiesce to that? And is that creating a feeling in me that I am powerless, perhaps, or have less power, or that I have to fight back. And in this world, almost every organization I know, doesn't matter what their political position is, uses the word fight at least 4 times in every email that I get. Um, it's our language even conveys this sense that we are in a struggle. We are in a battle for, in a sense, control of the political message that goes out. One of the areas that this is happening with great intensity right now is in what is taught in public schools. And also, can public schools impose mandates for masks and possibly for vaccines? Can businesses, particularly factories, demand that their employees have vaccinations? And, this is, in a sense, ignoring the fact in factories, I'm thinking, that normally unions would be fighting for protections for workers. When COVID first came, one of the places where it spread very rapidly was in meat packing plants. And a great many employees became ill and missed work. And quite a few of them died. Not a huge number, but quite a few of them died. And, little was done to improve the working conditions, the safety of the workers in those factories. And then, of course, measures have been taken to try to get people to wear masks, and then later to get immunized, and social distance. I should have got to throw that in, wearing masks and socially distancing. And businesses were closed, which gave rise to the slogan that the cure is worse than the disease. That, of course, has always been expressed by people who have not been in the hospital with COVID or have not died of COVID. People who've died, I guess, don't really express much. But and I say that somewhat facetiously, but we get into these situations where I talk about people talk to me, a physician, about how, COVID really isn't a big deal. It's just another flu, which means, it's unpleasant, but you can get through it. It's no big deal. And fail to recognize the vast number of people who have spent weeks, if not many weeks, in hospitals, and many of whom, of course, succumbed. I have to assure you, anyone who hasn't heard it already, that dying of COVID is not a nice thing. It's slow. It's terrifying because you can't get enough oxygen. And, you're isolated from your family, of course. So it's a really awful way to go, and not recommended. It would not be allowed as a form of punishment, for instance. It would be regarded as cruel and unusual. And I'm sort of making a joke of that, but the truth is, it's a really terrible thing. And we've lost over 700,000 people in this country and millions around the world to this disease. Anyway, I'm getting partisan. I appreciate that. But as I said, I, still regard myself as a physician, even though I don't practice medicine anymore. And, the discussion is what I'm really wanting to talk about, the way we talk about these things, the way people hold on to points of view against all rational response, can be very vexing. But what I really want to focus on tonight is how we personally react. And are we getting upset? Are we angry? Are we feeling frustrated, deeply frustrated with our friends, with the communities? Is this really causing us a great distress? And do we hold back? I know many people who do, which is why I asked the question. Do we hold back from having social discussion? I have many situations. I have some friends that I just don't talk about what's going on in the world. We talk about other stuff. Football is great. It's football season. Football is great. We could talk about that, but we don't talk about, the social issues of the day, because it's just not comfortable between us. And preserving the relationship is more important. So sometimes we just really have to back off. Now, we have to introduce something else when we talk about freedom, and that is the notion of social responsibility, obligations. What obligations do we have as citizens to others? Are we free to do, and should we be free to do whatever we want? Generally people say, well, if it doesn't hurt anybody, and that's the usual response to that. Yeah, as long as it doesn't hurt anybody. But what if it does hurt people and we're not willing to accept that? How deeply must we probe into the consequences of our behavior and our action to ask ourselves, do we have a social obligation? We talk about masking a great deal. Do I have an obligation to mask to protect others? I might not care about masking for myself, that is to protect myself from what others may give to me, but do I have an obligation to others? Do I have a responsibility? When we think about driving a car, we say, well, yeah, I can't just speed down the road because there might be an accident. I might hit somebody, some pedestrian steps out, or some child, God forbid, or something. Or a car just pulls into, from an intersection or a driveway and we're moving too fast. So we have obligations. And so that sense of social responsibility is very much tied up in the concept of freedom. And our social responsibilities can superficially look like a restriction of our freedom. And the question is, how do we balance that? How does society balance that? And that is not an easily answered question in any circumstance, in hardly any circumstance. We really don't know quite how to, there's no formula for how to do that. It becomes a matter of public opinion. But for those of us who feel that there's a social responsibility connected with something, and then there's a whole group of people who feel that there isn't a social responsibility, then, we're in a kind of difficult situation there, how we're going to deal with that, how we're going socially. So that's the basis of a lot of the problems. And what happens is that it gets internalized. People go around feeling unhappy. I hear it all the time. I had to unfriend somebody. I can't talk to somebody about whatever. It's hurting. It hurts us personally. And so getting back to that sense of liberation, it hurts us because we're attached to a particular course of action or a particular outcome. And not moving with that sense of liberation, not moving with that broad awareness, so that we just flow with natural law. Now, I have to introduce one other concept here, and that is, what about the concept of our karma, and certainly our dharma, which is our purpose in life, and how dharma and karma and our quest for liberation interact with all of these other things. And, my dharma is very much to be a healer. And so when people advocate things that I feel personally are not in alignment with staying healthy, then, I have some attachment to that. And so I've had to work on that quite a bit myself, and to look at that attachment and say, what is it about that? This is a great question. What is it about that bugs me, that makes me upset, that holds me back? And so I can ask myself, why does that person hold that point of view with such energy? And we might have a dialogue about that, but I have to have that dialogue in me first. Why do I hold that attachment to a particular set of ideas? And it's not just a review of the history, right? It's like, what's the energy behind that? Where's Where am I coming from with that? And sometimes we have to look very deeply at ourselves to find what that attachment is that compels us to feel so strongly about what's going on. So we have to see how our free will, there's a fundamental concept in this, which I haven't brought up yet, free will and determinism. And the determinism comes from our attachment, and the free will comes from our liberation. And yet, even in the state of liberation, we accept a social responsibility. We accept our obligations to society, to others. And so, even in that, we can engage in dialogue, but without a sense of fear. We're not afraid to be engaged. And we're also not feeling a need to impose our viewpoint on others. So we're not aggressive in that. When people get angry in a disagreement, many times that anger is an attempt to manipulate the other person, to scare them, basically. And we do this in all kinds of situations. We raise our voice to other people. It's an attempt to push them, to manipulate them, to scare them, if you will. And that's probably because as parents, we tend to raise our voices to our children when they misbehave, thinking that if we scare the daylights out of them, they'll do what we ask them to do. When I remember, which is much of the time, I babysit my 2-year-old a great deal, and 2-year-old granddaughter. And like today, it was time for her to leave and she had to get dressed, and she just decided it would be a game not to, you can't make me. And 2-year-old, and so I started crawling around on hands and knees, growling like a wild beast. And it was really cute because she went and climbed up on a piece of furniture like she could get away from me, like she was climbing a tree. And of course, she couldn't get away from me. And so, I made a game of it, and I was sort of pawing at her like a predator. And she, she was cowering. She was laughing. She thought it was really funny. And that's what you want to do, of course, is just lighten up the situation. So lightening the situation up is a great thing to do. Anyway, I think that gives some background and a sense of, oh yeah, I'm reacting to these things out of an attachment to certain values or ideas or concepts. And ask yourself, does it have to be that way? Do I have to be attached to that? Is it okay if somebody else holds an opinion that I think is absurd and I think they shouldn't hold? You got to watch out for that should word. There's a lot of judgment in should. And so, it opens up the possibility of dealing with social situations, all of which is very relevant because in a couple of days in the US, we have our Thanksgiving celebration. It's a time when traditionally when families get together and, usually there's somebody there. It's always called, they always say Uncle Bob or Aunt Ruth. I don't know where the names came from. Somebody is going to have an opinion, and particularly if the beer or wine are flowing, or maybe the whiskey afterwards. And it kind of disturbs the situation, right? Somebody's got a strong opinion and a bunch of people are going, like, I'm going to try not to say anything, but I really want to. And that's the kind of thing we're talking about. So we want to get to the feeling that's underneath that, pardon me, which we will now do in the group clearing session. And we'll just go inside and we're going to find out, what is that? What is it about that that's bothering me? See if we can loosen some of those attachments and get ourselves to a state where we're just more in the flow of who these people are, and maintain our connection to other people, to be comfortable with other people in that conversation without feeling we have to push. So with that, if anyone has any comments or questions, please put them in the chat. On a computer, at least, the chat's at the bottom of the screen. And you can just click on that. It opens up a little window. And I think you want to select where it says, it's going to say to, well, at least for me, it says hosts and panelists, but make sure you select everyone so that we can all see the chat. So if you can do that, I'm just going to click that too, just in case I respond to anybody in a text message. And I'm going to put that over there. So I'm not seeing anybody right now, so I'm going to just end this recording, and then we'll move into the group clearing session.